Welcome to the Planet Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us. The Planet Trillion Trees podcast is happy to announce that we have won 2 Garden Communicator International Silver Laurel Medal Awards for Best Podcast and Best Podcast Episode. We've also won a Garden Communicators International Gold Laurel Medal Award for a Best Podcast Episode. We'd like to thank Garden Communicators for their recognition.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA-certified arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. Monheim Microphones, unparalleled excellence. MonheimMicrophones.com. The Urban Wood Network gives people strength in numbers and a collective voice to showcase the growing environmental impact of an industry like urban wood utilization. This is really critical in a world where resource recovery and carbon storage benefits can go a long way to meet the needs of climate sustainability goals of cities, businesses, and consumers. Contact us at urbanwoodnetwork.org. This podcast is being recorded on December 13th, 2024. Angelique Robb graduated from Louisiana State University in Petroleum Engineering, working in the oil industry for many years in the U.S. and the U.K. In 2008, she qualified as a landscape designer and launched a design and build company, Papillon Designs and Landscaping Limited in Scotland, UK. Since then, she has built up the company into a national award-winning practice. She is passionate about the industry and helping to raise the bar. In 2021, living in the U.S., she launched a media company to educate and inspire landscape professionals in the design, build, maintain disciplines in the Southeast region under the name of Pro Landscaper for the publication and Future Landscape for the event. These were subsequently rebranded to SYNKD in 2022. In 2022, SYNKD expanded to 26 states and has grown the in-person event SYNKD Live by 100% since its launch in 2023. By highlighting the companies and leaders in our industry, SYNKD shows the way to those leaders looking to run their business better and increase the quality of their production. Welcome to the Planet Trillion Trees podcast, Angelique. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
Thank you so much, Eva, for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
And I guess we'd like to start, Angelique, by hearing about your company. I, did my due diligence. I'm very interested that someone that started out studying, I guess you would call it the petroleum industry and engineering, found your way to horticulture and this fabulous organization that works with the landscape industry. So tell us about yourself.
Well, great. Yeah, it is a bit of a journey. I graduated from Louisiana State University as a petroleum engineer, and I went to work in the oil industry as a drilling engineer. And I don't think I'm your typical engineer. I like the fact that it was not an exact science, that you were dealing with Mother Nature. You had to visualize things down the hole as you were drilling, and you'd have problems. And it took a lot of visualization and creativity. And fast forward to the landscape design, construction, maintain side of things. And it takes a lot of visualization. You know, you have to be able to picture the space in front of you transformed and sell that to the clients to be able to win the work. And so it's actually not that different. When it boils down to it. And the other thing in the oil industry is that as the lead on each project, I was a project manager of many different trades that all had different specialties. And I had to make first off, design decisions based on weighing up what everybody brings to the table. And then I would run the rig and I would make decisions on operational detail or change the path or the decisions operationally on a day-to-day basis. So project managing many trades for the good of the project. And so if you're familiar with landscape construction, design construction and maintenance, you know, that is very much what you do when you're running projects, and design and build was what I started. So I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, but I like to draw those analogies. And I ended up going to Scotland in my oil work and loved it. Loved being in the mountains, loved the crazy weather, loved being close to Europe to travel a bit. But I had designed and constructed my own backyard in Houston. And it kept coming back to me and going, actually, I would like to do something in that industry. So to make sure I was serious about it, I took a landscape design certification course out of London. And while I was still doing my engineering, and I never thought I would be interested in going back to school in anything. And my interest was really piqued. So I did a landscape design certification course and really just fell in love with the industry. I then launched my business doing it part-time with my engineering work. And I did that for quite a few years before I was able to say, okay, I want to change my path to run a landscape design, build and maintain company. So I've had that company for 17 years now in Scotland. And in 2018, my Scottish husband, and I have half Scottish, half Cajun babies, and we decided to give them a culture shock and move them to Louisiana. and it worked.
Great.
At the time, I thought, you know, what am I going to do? Okay, we'll figure it out when we get there. Moved here in the fall of 2019. And while I was running my business in Scotland, I started about 5 years in, I started receiving a publication that was connecting design, build, and maintain in the landscape industry. And it really made a huge difference to my business as a reference, but also for networking. I then knew what was going on in the rest of the industry and how people were doing things better. Things that I was trying as a business owner to juggle, to research on my own, but then you don't know what to believe and who to trust. But then they also had an event as well. So that company reached out to me when they found out that I was moving to the States and said, would you launch our brand in the US? So I originally launched their brand only in the Southeast, and that was Pro Landscaper magazine and FutureScape event.
Right.
It was a great tester, but from day one, approaching people, cold calling people to say, hi, Mr. or Mrs. Landscape Architect, I want to feature you in Pro Landscaper magazine. And I got hung up on a lot of times saying, I'm not in the landscape industry. I'm a landscape architect. I got that more than you, or I'm a deck builder. I'm not in the landscape industry. I'm a contractor. I'm not in the landscape industry. I realized right off the bat that the industry here in the US was more divided than I could even imagine. In Europe, I think we all believe we're in the landscape industry. Where we're here in the States, it does seem that the word landscape divides the industry. And so I knew I'd have to rebrand at some point. But again, using their branding, I'd never run a publication, I'd never run an event. So again, me doing that under their brand gave me a lot of the materials that I didn't even know where to start to build, so it was a good tester. And after we had our first event, FutureScape, in Atlanta, that was in early 2022, I thought, okay, there's something here, but we have to rebrand. And it doesn't resonate with the people that I need to come together. Arborists would say, I'm not in the landscape industry. And I'm like, okay, but you are, how can I bring people together before I even talk to them? Because I can't talk to a million people efficiently. So the idea is that, okay, let's see, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get all these different disciplines that are very siloed and don't cross communicate. They do a great job in their own discipline. Even the associations, they support, these disciplines very strongly, a lot of breadth and strength and knowledge. But if we want to create, I know that our industry is really important to the environment. It's important to people. It's important to our health and wellness. It is a critical industry. But if we can't even get our arms around all the disciplines that impact it, then we're never going to rise to the level of importance that the general public need to know about us. Our own disciplines need to know how they can help. And so I like to explain it as like the red thread running through the industry. It starts with landscape architects and it moves and at different points you have all these different disciplines that are affected or need to be included. But then it's long-term maintenance, is a huge impact. And, there are so many examples that I could give you.
Well, let me ask a quick question.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for that overview. I presented with a lot of clarity, a lot of precision language. How is that message being received when you talk to the other, I hate to say factions, but other components of the landscape industry?
Well, I think first off, the name synced, as in synchronized, it's unusual. And people now go, oh, what is synced? I don't know what that is. So at least it starts with a question. We've been sending out our printed publication to 10,000 businesses since 2022, since we rebranded.
Oh, that'll do it. Yeah, great.
But again, we want to go that next step further and say, do you want it? Do you understand what we're doing? And if you're not going to use it, I don't know how this sounds, but I don't want to waste paper.
Sure.
Sending it to you if you don't want it and you're not going to use it and you don't get what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you make better decisions for your business, differentiate your business from an environmental, sustainable point of view, and give you the tools to run your business better. But we do have some people that say, take me off the list. And I'm okay with that. We also have digital e-newsletters every week, every other week, depending on what's going on. Like right now, we're increasing the frequency because we have an event coming up. So we've had an in-person event since 2022 each year in Atlanta, and our event attendance has doubled each year. So we have our next event coming up in January in Atlanta, and we are wanting it to continue to double. We're getting a lot more traction than we did last year. So fingers crossed. We have a lot of avenues that we're getting out to people, but also having people on my podcast. I have a podcast too called Synced on Air. We've only done that for a year now, but we have a website, we have social media, TikTok, all that good stuff. So we're trying to meet landscape businesses and leaders where they are. So that means we have to have a lot of content and get it out in lots of different ways. We started with just the magazine and the event and digital, but quickly realized that people aren't finding out about us, don't know who we are. So, as soon as that happened, but we're a small team, so it's really a challenge. There's only 2 of us in the company with some freelancers that are part-time. And we're doing a lot for the size that we are. Is it enough? Probably not. We want to grow and do more. I have aspirations to have a small event in 4 different regions around the US every year. I don't want it to be a big event. I don't want to compete with the big events. I want it to be small and community oriented, that you come to meet other people that are trying to do the same thing.
I want to put in here that, and you were saying it's hard to get them together. I think I know how you could get them together. And listening to you, and because of my background in education, the one group that you may not have yet in your portfolio are planners. And planners, city and regional planners, have to work with all these people.
Yes.
And if you were to invite them...
We are reaching out to them, but they're harder to get a meeting with.
Okay. So I was going to say, because, it all starts in the planning stage. And I know that in Europe, it's a lot different, because I studied there and I did some work there. And I found that they like to meet as a group, like a whole group, the whole entirety. And that way they can see the plan from the very beginning and where it fits into the larger context, all the way to the very end of the project and how it's going to serve the community or serve the people that it's being meant to build.
Well, and I didn't do this in Europe. So this is new to me in the States, but it's also new to me as a job to be, a journalistic publisher and event coordinator. We do have a commissioner that's coming to our next event in Atlanta. We also have some UGA, University of Georgia professors coming and bringing some of their students. But it's not as much, I've been reaching out to groups for a long time, and it's just, it's hard to get to the right people and also tell them how we can help them. Being on this podcast will hopefully open more doors to, different groups that can spread the word. So we are reaching out to a lot of education outlets, if you like, in Georgia for this next event. And I have people that know people that are helping me do that, because I've, left messages and emails, but that goes to show that as an industry, as a society, we're bombarded with emails and phone calls all the time right now.
Really
I am too.
Yeah.
I have so many calls that I don't answer, because I know, like, they've called me before and I've said I'm not interested. And, we get sales calls from all over other countries, so I know that it's hard to get through the trees sometimes.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to say that you weren't reaching out, but I just, as a teacher, as a professor, I was in landscape architecture and horticulture. So it was a department that was joined. But we also had our community and regional planning department. And we many times would associate with them to see where the project was going to be and how would it affect the planning for that area. And that to me was like so invaluable when you sit and talk to a planner, and because they're looking at the big spatial picture, they're looking at it from outer space and then coming down. But
exactly. Yeah.
And it's the way in which everybody looks at a project that sometimes they're very myopic, and you need to be more mega
holistic.
Absolutely. And how it's going to fit into the larger context. Because once you can connect the landscape with other entities, then you're going to be very successful, because it's going to make people feel like, whoa, they want to talk to us, or this group over here wants to talk to us. And it doesn't happen that easy. And like you said, it is one of the hardest. And I think it's because there's this message about people who cut lawns are lawn cutters. And the people who do design, they're too good to talk to the people who do the manual labor. And I think that that's our own prejudices within this country, that we think that, maybe one group is less than the other. And to me, that really counteracts what we all do together,
Well, and I presented recently to the Louisiana ASLA chapter and for their annual meeting. And what I did is I told them what the rest of the industry looks like, and showed how, we have bankers opening landscape businesses and the value of the industry, of the maintenance, of the design and build part of the industry. I had many landscape architects coming up to me afterwards and saying, love what you're talking about, and we want to be in design and build companies.
Yeah.
We don't want to be, at a landscape architecture firm because we want to see it be built. We want to get involved and understand the construction. And it's really inspiring to see that. So I don't think it's as much of a difference as it maybe used to be. And, we have this panel coming up at Sync Live, and it's business owners under the age of 30 running multi-million-dollar companies. And the person that actually I had at Sync Live 2024 that suggested to have this panel, Austin Roth, he had only turned 21, and I think he's at a $10 million revenue company, and he's 21 now. And that's inspiring, I think, for our industry. He didn't have a family member in the industry, and so he's done this himself, and I think that understanding how different our industry is going to be is different today. But you fast forward, and in 5 years, 10 years time, we are going to be looking at a very much more connected industry because of these young entrepreneurs that are doing things their own way. They're embracing technology. We have so much technology in our industry that we didn't have 3 years ago. Things are moving a lot faster. Another thing about Europe compared to here is that there are a lot more nature-based solutions in Europe that, again, a lot of them are in the US now. And I'm amazed how many landscape architects, design and build companies don't know about these really, really game-changing hardscaping products, retaining wall products, very construction heavy, but they are game changing. And, it's really exciting to me that I'm in the US at a time that I know about products that I've been using for 15 years and they're just landing on US soil. And I've been using them for 10, 15 years, and I know how much better they are. And so, in preparing for this, I was like, there's something about materials that I feel like the trade shows that, I try to go to as many trade shows as I can, ASLA conference, Elevate conference, Equip Expo, Hardscape North America. And what I try to do is pull from those the products and services that help business owners up what they're doing. So they can be more profitable, or they can work with less people, or they can offer a service that none of their competitors will be offering that's more beneficial for the environment and sustainability of that project. And again, I think that we talk to a lot of our advertisers and they go, yeah, trade shows just don't work anymore. And we're like, trying to change our approach because I feel like, again, like the emails, if we're bombarded with a million things every day, you turn off and you can't see what's right in front of you that can help us as an industry do things better.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And you've hit on a lot of wonderful things that I know our listeners are going to want to hear because you're kind of singing the music or speaking the music, if you will, of our listeners. We have a really broad base of listeners, and we've seen it in the tree industry, especially how it has changed dramatically in just a very short time. Wouldn't you say, Hal, with some of the companies really with the younger people?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some influencers out there that are kind of pushing an agenda that might be called arboriculture 2.0. It's not the tree business that your grandparents ran with, DDT and hauling your trimmings and logs to the fire pit and, massive burn piles and things like that. But I guess as I listen to you talk, Angelique, I am similarly of the opinion that we're about to witness some big changes in the industry, our reliance on fossil fuels for every piece of equipment that's out there, or at least, 93% of the equipment that's out there. And also the way, the big commercial properties, our business parks and such are set up with big expanses of turf, and you had touched on nature-based solutions. And yes, the tree care industry is becoming aware of that they have to treat the tree, the individual tree, as something that's providing tremendous ecological services. And I think one way or another, those trends will continue to establish themselves himself in the landscape industry as well. But for now, we really are about turf. And you think, okay, 10, 15 years from now, the big industrial parks, will there be some conversion? Will they be doing more with stormwater management and stormwater capture, things like that? So yes and no. I think we're watching its birth.
Yeah. Oh, well, and we've had a project by SWA Group in Arkansas, and it was an area that flooded regularly. Every year it would flood. They actually designed and constructed a park there, and it is still designed to flood. The planting, the hardscaping, the stormwater infrastructure, everything is there to allow it to flood. But now when it's not flooded, it's a community park. They have concerts there. They teach people how to grow their own food. They have native plant areas, so we're trying to highlight those projects that are taking what nature challenges us with and still able to produce a beautiful park. So another thing is we talk about using native plants, but, when you plant them as a plug, you can't tell what they are maybe or how they're going to grow, and they need to be managed in a totally different way than an ornamental. And SWA talked about how they were helping the employees that were going to be maintaining it, didn't know anything about plants. So this is what it looks like when you first plant it. This is what it looks like in year 1, year 5. You don't deadhead it. You let it move as it wants to because it'll find where it's happy.
Yes.
That's totally different. We as an industry need more. That education going from ornamental plantings, to native plantings is a huge shift in how you maintain it, so we have to help.
And I think the other thing too is that we're shifting from a very managed to a more ecological. Mm-hmm. So we're crossing over other disciplines as well. We're crossing over into the ecology end of things. And we hear that a lot with horticulture, and we hear it a lot in the landscape design or landscape architecture industry. How are we going to design it so that it's ecologically friendly and it is also, very desirable and inviting to the public. So if they want to, walk there, it doesn't feel like something's going to jump out at you or, those are the kind of things that people think about. And you're right. We're shifting the paradigm dramatically. And I think that what you're doing is actually setting up a framework for everything to happen or for people to talk. And talking is really what needs to happen. That most of the time never happens. It's usually the thing is built and then all of a sudden somebody says, well, wasn't supposed to be there. Or that wasn't supposed to look like that.
Go and spray all that and put something else in.
Exactly. And you are talking exactly what happens. You're telling the story. And so what you're doing is actually bringing people together to talk. And when you have conversations like you're saying and bringing different segments of the industry together, you're actually making them see the bigger picture. Even if they might not want to, they're actually seeing from somebody else's perspective.
And that's hard to do.
Yes.
It's a challenge. I'm so busy doing my own job. I don't have time for that. But, if we want to be relevant, it's like, okay, the Polaroid camera did come back, but but we all need to stay relevant. And if we're not moving with the times and looking around us, we could become irrelevant, and I think the biggest challenge that we have as a media company is getting people's attention without spending heaps and heaps of money because we're small and grassroots, and everybody's shouting for attention. Everybody wants attention. And when people are so busy with their day to day, how do you get that focus that we're bringing people to teach you how to do your job better or do it how the future needs you to do it or be aware of tools that you will need in the future. It's easy to just stay in your, I'm too busy today.
I love that. I love that way you said that because what I was thinking is that when somebody's head is down doesn't mean that things aren't happening around them. And they could be missing everything that's happening because their head is down. Once they lift up their head, they can start to see, oh, that's where I fit in. That's what I'm doing to make this successful. And I think that's the other thing. When people see what part of them is making the whole successful, then they realize that they're part of a larger segment of that picture.
You know, in some ways, COVID gave the public more, how can I say this, more collateral that our industry is so important because people wanted our outdoor spaces. But the other thing that I've noticed with, let's say, landscape architect firms that I know of and I deal with and they love what we're doing is that a lot of people are all working from home now. And I feel like that precludes collaboration. And then now we have to work harder to integrate people and learn from each other. And, you know, I like to be a collaborator. I like to learn from other people. When I worked, and this is oil industry, but when I worked in the US, I always had an office that I could close the door. I moved to Europe and I was in a cubicle that, you know, you could actually see what everybody was doing without even getting out of your seat. But when you stood up, you know, you could see everybody, you know, what they were working on and everything. And at first I was like, oh my goodness, this is so distracting. You know, I can't get any work done. But then I realized, well, actually, you know, I just heard them start a conversation that I wanted to know the answer to that question too. And you start to see the bigger picture by just being in the same room. And I worry as our industry, I love working from home sometimes. You know, if I have something that I need to concentrate on and I can't be distracted, or that's when I put on my headphones or whatever. So everybody needs that kind of time. But I worry if there's too much being done remotely or separate from the bigger picture that you lose track of the impact that we can make together. And so we've now started a membership program and it's very inexpensive. It's $60 a year, but we're going to have, you know, regular get-togethers, whoever can join. It's obviously not mandatory, but just to meet other people like our event, but remote, because, you know, our audience are asking for that. And as a business owner, I know how lonely it is. You know, like you often want to know what other people are doing and ask them really detailed questions, but you don't want to bother them at work because they're busy. So to have kind of a regular meetup to say, I'm in this state, you know, who's in a different state? What are you doing to do this? What are you having success with? You know, maybe you say everybody wants to work from home. How are you getting them together? Oh, we're using Slack or we're using Zoom or, you know, just those kind of conversations. You know, we have a lot of challenges in our industry. And then you put that in how things have changed in the world or how people communicate or younger generations coming into our industry, you know, and you have to stay on top of a lot of things.
You said that in Europe, they're about 10 or 15 years ahead of us.
Yes.
Your time in Scotland, walk us through some of the takeaways, notable landscapes that you're remembering that woke you up to this notion of nature-based solutions.
The way you framed it, what woke me up to it, you know, when I first started my business, I was pretty naive and I thought, I'm only going to use natural stone and I'm only going to use plants that are very easy to maintain. And my clientele didn't all see that as a benefit. And by the time you have employees, you now need to keep your hopper full of projects. And you go, oh, wow, okay, this is harder than I thought. You know, all the quarries in the UK have been closed and, you know, we only import from Europe and other areas. And then people don't want to pay the premium for this and that. And they don't like native plants and the way they look. And, you know, so I had to go, okay, I need to broaden my focus. And how can I show them, okay, just because it's native plants doesn't mean it's going to look wild, or we can achieve a naturalistic look, but with some ornamental plants. You know, like it's not native or cultivars. There's so many ways in between. And I had to speak a different language to open up my clients' eyes. You know, okay, I want something really low maintenance. Show them that. Oh, no, I don't want that. Okay, what about this? Oh, yeah, I could deal with that. So again, different natives are different ways to manage it, and so it meant that I had to have experts that I could call on depending on what I wanted to do. But there were also certain governmental policies that were put in place, like due to being an island that floods easier than it did, a while back. They said, okay, your front yard can't be impermeable more than your driveway. And so again, I was in Scotland, lower populations, but it was put in place because of London and Birmingham and big cities that they were getting charged to park their own car in front of their house. So people started concreting their entire front yard and parking their car there. So they didn't have to pay to park in front of their own house. So, you put something in place and it drives a different behavior than you expected. And I think that was unexpected from the government's point of view, that like people would start tarmacking or concreting their front yards to park their cars there. So then they said, okay, right, now that this is happening, we need to prevent that. So then these products popped up everywhere. There is a huge market for beautiful hardscaping, natural stone, no cement in the makeup, hardscaping products that are, and this is a quote from one of the companies, 19 times more permeable than the block paving that's permeable. Right. Mm-hmm. This stuff is 19 times more permeable than that stuff. And the reason why I have to say that is that I get mixed up on what's a UK term versus a US term, even though I've been here for 4 years now. And they mix up in my brain. And that's a resin-bound aggregate that it's not a product that when you pressure wash it, it moves. You can pressure wash this stuff. You can have heavy machinery come on. It can be for parking lots. It can be for lots of different things. It's the underneath that makes up the strength. So again, I think there are some products in the States that have been here for a while that people go, oh, I know that stuff. I've used that. It doesn't work. But there's a new generation of those products that are coming across. And we happen to have some at our event coming up in January. But there's products that I know about, like underground tree anchors, when you're planting a mature tree and it won't stand up. So then people tend to go, well, let's bury it deeper. And then the collar is buried because of a practical reason. They're trying to keep it still and they don't want to use too many stakes, or the stakes aren't holding it. And so they bury it too deep. Well, there's a product that I know of from being in Europe that's now in the States, that will be at our event. There's so many better ways of doing things for the trees, for the landscapers that are planting the trees, for the client that wants their tree to live, for building it with hardscaping in conjunction with it. You need so much hardscaping. You plant this tree in a hole of soil, but that's not enough for it to thrive. Soil cells and, there's so many things, but they only are promoted to one part of our industry. So then we need the bigger industry to embrace it, because landscape architects will design a plan with soil cells and underground tree anchors and all this stuff. And then it'll go to the GC or the contractor and they'll go, okay, now I have to hit this budget. So now going back to that concreting your driveway up in London, we all have different drivers depending on who has the plans. And unfortunately, the general contractor usually has an unachievable budget to build something. And so these seen as nice to haves, well, I've never used soil cells. Why should I do that? That's a huge cost. Well, I can reach the budget if I take those out. But what they're doing is they're cutting the lifespan of that tree short. They're, maybe not using these underground anchors. And then it gives whoever plants the tree, it gives them hell because they can't keep that darn tree, stable. So they bury it too deep. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have a complicated industry and we're always having to balance different objectives for different groups of people. And anytime you hand it over to a different group of people, they have a different objective and driver and maybe cost that they have to manage. And I can see why everybody does what they do because we all have different objectives. But really, if you step back and holistically look at the drivers are all the same. It's just we put these intermediary drivers that contradict our overall. Our overall driver is to have long living trees and get shade from them and have our outdoor environment thrive without too much maintenance. The hardscaping stay in place, even though these trees are growing underneath them. we all have the same drivers holistically. We just don't when it comes to when we hand over an individual project.
And I think the other thing too is that when you hand over a project, everybody is about the bottom line. And, I remember working with one company that said they never take the bottom line. They always take the middle. That's their standard procedure.
But if the government contracts say that they have to take the cheapest, then...
And it doesn't mean that it's going to follow the plan that was originally designed.
Yeah.
Because they leave out things because of cost. And that's where...
If we talked about value more and cost of the entire life cycle.
Yes.
And that's where I say you can be a design and build company, but educate your client on the maintenance costs, because then they will, I like to use decking because it's a really simple explanation. Pressure treated pine decking. It only has a very short lifespan. And that's if you spend a lot of money every year or twice a year staining it and oiling it or whatever you need to do it still will have a limited lifespan. You go to a thermally modified wood or a composite product, and it's 30% more, or maybe it's 100% more. But if you costed up the maintenance for your clients, even if they're going to be doing it, they would go with the composite or the thermally modified wood right off the bat. If you explained how much work it's going to either cost them or physically cost them, you have upsold a better product. Now think if you could do that for everything that you design and build. We need to be looking at longevity and value of maintenance to add that in so that they can make decisions. Whether you're a developer or a homeowner, if that gets explained to you in the start, then, you'll get that and you'll opt for better materials. And
it's better for the planet. When we talk about it's better for the planet when we have to constantly keep dumping things into the dump because life is cut short or what have you. But the other thing I was going to mention is that, in Europe, when I was studying horticulture at the University of Reading, one of the things that I learned is that you have to have a landscape management plan with every landscape. You can't just have a landscape design and not have a document that goes with it to tell people how to manage it and how much it's going to cost to manage it. And that's how most of the designs were either not chosen to do because it was too expensive to manage it afterwards. We don't ever know how much it's going to cost us to manage it afterwards because we don't give landscape management plans. Once you have a landscape management plan, whoa, this is going to cost me how much every year to maintain it?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
So I interviewed a planner. So back to your earlier point, one of my first interviews for this publication in the US was interviewing a planner. And she had an internationally acclaimed landscape architect firm do the plans. And then she had a company that cost up the maintenance cost, the management plan. So they did this. And I said, oh, so did you ask them for a cheaper maintenance design when it came to the horticulture and the hardscaping and all that? And the planner went, I didn't know there was any options. And so again, we also have to understand that from a design point of view, that there are options. And if you go for a Pete Udolph naturalistic matrix planting plan, that will be the lowest maintenance. But that's not what this park opted for, but they didn't even know that there was an option, so they weren't given options to start with. And they even had a maintenance plan costed up. And so I think that there's a whole level of education. See, it's not just one group. I think
that's right.
The moral of what I'm saying is everybody, like landscape architects, can learn from maintenance companies.
Absolutely.
Construction companies can learn from maintenance companies and vice versa. We all need to, it's not that landscape architects aren't listening or connecting. It's everybody's not connecting, and we can all learn from everybody. And it seems so simplistic if we just talk to each other. And I'm like, if I had known the challenges put in front of me to do this, to help people collaborate, I don't know if I would have started this media company. But you know what? I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I didn't know how hard it would be to bring all the different disciplines together, because I wouldn't have started it, because you would have gone, this is impossible.
But we never really know what our roadblocks are going to be when we start something. And, you have this vision of how it's going to look in the end, or you see how everybody comes together in the end. But all the little idiosyncrasies that keep people apart is something that we can never, the expectations are not there.
Yeah, true.
But, it's a journey, and I am so excited to be on this journey and connect with people like you that want to know what I'm doing, are doing as a company, and want to give advice or connect us or show off what we're doing. I mean, for every person that says, oh, don't send me that publication, or I'm not interested, I have 10 others that go, really? Is that what you're doing? Wow, that's pretty cool. Or asking me questions. I had a landscape architect say, I've never heard our industry described as the green industry. That's interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
What?
Yeah. So again, there's so much room for improvement that keeps me fired up. And every day I'm talking to people that are interested in what we're doing, and I haven't met them before. And,
I have to say that I have to thank Jay Worth for bringing us together. Single Ops, right? Another podcast he records from Italy. And, I just really am thankful that somebody like him is connecting us so that we know that you're connecting also. You're trying to be a connector and connecting other people. That's all important because we learn from each other. And I think the best university in the world is working with other people.
Real life and
everyday experiences. But you were talking about earlier about being at home and working from home, and I work from home quite a bit. And I found myself listening to what you were saying, and I said, oh, no wonder I've been going out for tea or whatever more often. It's because I want to make those connections. It's because I need to make those connections. And, if somebody calls me up and says, can we meet up and just chat? I need to ask you some questions about something I'm working on. Sure. Okay. Where do you want to meet? And you meet up and you realize, oh, you know what? They're going through something similar that you're going through. And like you're saying, that once you hear it from somebody else, you feel validated, but you also feel good that somebody wants to connect with you to look at the bigger picture. And
Can I just say something highly controversial? Is that I think women do it better than men.
I think you're probably right.
We know that.
We know that.
I'm just hoping for a little backlash because it'll really get our podcast out in the
But you know what, Hal? I have to say, Hal is a really good connector. He's a really good connector. And I don't want to say atypical, but you are a connector.
Well, thank you.
That's one of the reasons why I liked having him on the podcast. And, I said, well, why don't you be my partner on this project? Because he is a connector.
I mean, I've had people say, oh, could you just send me an email on what you do? And I'm like, no, I want to chat to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I sit alone in this office, and it's the hardest thing. It helps me focus, but I want a video chat. I would rather meet in person, but that's expensive and time consuming. But I love that people can work from home and we have the tools to do that. It's making sure that you balance that with interaction and collaboration and getting out enough. And however that works for you. I think if people love being home, then it may mean more video calls, or it may mean you have to reach out more. Yeah, you can counter it. It just takes more effort.
I do think that under 30 crowd that you mentioned is also going to be a force in terms of unification, if you will, that there will be more interactions between the disciplines. And I think it's obviously a generation that grew up with technology and the internet. And I think they see the power of what technology can do for knocking down the walls and unifying.
I agree. And they've been using the technology, and they're developing their own technology. I mean, Joel Northup, that was in our last issue. I was like, in the interview, I had to stop him. I was like, how old are you? He was like 28, 29.
Yeah.
He launched a landscape business. He grew it into design and build and maintenance. He sold that. He started a robotic mower company. He sold that, then went back to school to learn how to program, and has made AI software for landscape companies. and it's 3 years old, his business. And I'm like, what have I been doing? Like, I've not been doing anything compared to what you've been doing in the last 10 years. Like,
But I think,
yeah, we've all had those conversations.
but you have to really think that, as they always say, that they're on our shoulders. So what we've taken in, they're creating much faster than we could have ever created because it wasn't available to us. And I even look at my own children and think, wow, like, well, look what they're doing. And look where they are.
Yeah.
And, how much they're accomplishing. But it also says something about our society that they really care.
Yeah.
And having caring young people today is like a jewel. You can't ask for anything better than that. To have caring young people who are concerned about the environment, who are concerned about their neighbors, and who are the most social. They say that they're more social than ever, than any other generation, because they want to be out with their friends.
That's great to hear. Because, I had young kids when COVID hit, and it really was hard. We had just moved. We'd just gotten through the tears of, I want to go home. I want to go back to Scotland. And then COVID hit, and it was a really weird time for my young kids.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had only just started making friends, and then they couldn't see any of them. And we didn't know the parents yet, or we were just, you do worry about future. I think there's a lot of exciting things to come. I meet a lot of companies that are doing work on cement replacements and, more sustainable construction products. That gets me really excited. And I think, the technology behind products, the technology behind collaboration, the technology, all these things are going to amount to a lot of exciting progress.
I have to ask you, Angelique, as we get close to wrapping up, what's it looking like in Louisiana in terms of landscape design and engineering? Any projects come to mind? I'm asking because it seems like Louisiana's kind of ground zero for its own flavor of environmental catastrophe with flooding and drought.
Yes. So I have talked to Shannon Blakeman, is a Carbo landscape architecture firm in Baton Rouge. I know that they're working on, so this is interesting. Louisiana gets a lot of rain. It's a very wet state. Its freshwater aquifers are depleting at a record rate, and we are not replenishing them. So when I talk about permeable landscapes, Louisiana needs to rip out a lot of concrete and get this under control and keep replenishing our freshwater aquifers. I know that they're working on a project for New Orleans in particular about replenishing freshwater aquifers. And, it's a city that's below sea level with the levees. It is, it's below ground zero. We even featured the Four Seasons hotel construction where they had to hold 100-year storm worth of water as they made that hotel on site, and they needed vaults underground to hold rainwater to be able to permeate into the soils. And that was our first issue of SYNKD.
Okay.
That we featured that project and the stratovault cells that they had to use and the bioswales and, capturing all the rainwater from the roof of that hotel on site. And there's barely any land associated with the site. So again, an engineering challenge that Rotolo Consultants worked on. I interviewed them in person. I was really happy to have a site visit in person.
Oh, nice.
I can send you a link to that project. Really amazing. They even had the Corps of Engineers had to stop the project at one stage because the Mississippi River levels were too high to excavate because it's right on the Mississippi River. So at certain points in the project, they had to stop construction, stop excavating because the Mississippi was too high. They had to wait for that level to come down so they could continue excavation. Really, it's amazing what we can build. We've done rooftop gardens, the Marriott headquarters, in Texas, where they have a rooftop landscape. Again, the challenge is there. We have some very smart people, that are working on some great projects. Where any downfalls come is in between those sectors, not in the actual discipline. It's
Yeah.
the communication that isn't always happening, but we can do some amazing things together.
Absolutely.
That's a
Well,
great
keep on
story.
doing this amazing work. As you indicated, you didn't realize what you were getting yourself into. It's too late to get out, Angelique.
You can always call us.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll meet for coffee.
Yeah. Let's meet in person.
Actually,
that.
have you ever been up for Mance?
I have once, and a snowstorm hit, and it was it was during COVID. And yeah, with our event being in January, it's a tough time for me, but I hope to be there in future once I have a bigger team.
We always love to go to that because we just get a chance to meet and talk with people and really chit chat and learn what's happening in the industry, which is so important for us.
Well, let's make a date 2026. I'll be there.
Okay. Wow. That's great. That would be great. We still have to ask our favorite question, which is
such a hard one.
And we don't have to make it hard because you could give us one from Scotland and one from here.
Okay.
What is your favorite tree from Scotland and which is your favorite tree from the US? Right today, just today.
Today, I was like, I love the beech tree. It's like a ghost. The bark it glows and it's such a beautiful, and it's in Scotland, and I love a liquid amber. And in Louisiana, I was like, I want a dogwood tree, and I know they're hard to get established, So, but you know what I wanted to say about this is any tree that's thriving is actually majestic. And lately, I've been looking at trees everywhere I go and going, that tree's not thriving, and that tree's not thriving, and that's what's painful, So, yeah, when any tree is thriving, I'm in awe of it, and what their roots can achieve to cling onto a cliffside, grow after the whole tree has fallen over. We had this hill that we walked to from our house very regularly, and I miss that hill, but it looked like there was a storm, and these trees, and it's a lot of Scots pines, they're growing along the ground and then up, and they're all at different levels, but it's like one part of the hillside. And I'm like, kids, just imagine some crazy storm came through and all these trees, they were all at different levels of growth. Right. And they all were practically blown over, and some, force of nature tried to down these trees. And then they all started growing back up. And we love to climb on them and sit on them. It's like as level as a table. And, look what those trees have lived through. We can only guess what they've survived, and they're still going today. As
a population, is the Scots pine doing okay in Scotland?
I think, there's a lot of drive to plant more Scots pines. Again, the government require so many native trees in a development. So that's helping. I think the same things are true there. We're planting them too deep. We're covering the flare with mulch. We're hardscaping. We're chainsawing their roots to put in a driveway. It's all those same things are happening. So I worry about not planting enough trees so much as, what we're doing to the trees in the meantime. That means they're not thriving and they won't survive their lifetime.
Yeah, I like your answer, though. What's your favorite tree? A tree that's thriving. I mean,
I like that.
That is a great answer.
I like that too.
Yeah,
so which tree did you see last that was thriving that you remember?
There are some beautiful live oaks in our local park, Moncus Park. It's the first donation-funded public park in the U.S. They've won some kind of award to work with Central Park in New York City because they've done such great work. And there's some live oaks that have been far from the construction site, enough to not get damaged, and they seem to be doing really well. And there's an arborist in charge of them now. And yeah, I'll leave it there. I could talk for hours, as you can tell.
Moncus Park, and is that in Lafayette?
Lafayette, Louisiana.
Okay, good to know.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We are delighted that you could be with us today and share all your insights about our industries to make it like one big industry. If you would give your events dates again, give a shout out and give our listeners the website, that would be awesome.
Great. So our event is January 14th through 16th. 2025 in Atlanta, Georgia. The website for that is synkedlive.com, synkdlive.com. And our main website is synked.io, synkd.io.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Take care and have a great holiday season.
See you in Mets 2026.
Yeah.
You got it.
Take care. Maybe,
Thanks,
hopefully
Angelique.
before then.
Hopefully before then, yes.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The Planet Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromedan Recordings in Hollywood, California.